A quick introduction maybe of myself and the organization that I represent. So Dirk Vantyghem, I'm the Director General of Euratex. And as you probably know, our role as Euratex is to represent and defend the interests of the entire European textile and clothing industry here in Brussels. So we are working on a daily basis with the European institutions to make sure that the European regulatory framework, the European policies are supporting or trying to support the competitiveness of 200,000 textile companies in the European Union. To respond to your first question, what are the main risks? Today we are facing some critical situation. On the one hand, on the regulatory side, there are many changes taking place. The European Union is going through an important agenda to develop new regulations, new standards for the textile industry, but there are many disruptions in this regulatory change. There are proposals being made, put back on hold, so that creates a lot of uncertainty for the textile entrepreneur to know what kind of regulation will be decided and enter into force by when. So a lot of regulatory uncertainty, making it very difficult for the companies to decide when, what kind of investment needs to be taken. And the second risk or the second turbulence is of course related to the markets, to global markets, where we all follow what is happening in Washington in terms of all these tariff escalation, reactions from China, reactions from Europe, again, making it very difficult for textile companies today to plan ahead. You know, what tariff will be implemented when, by which country, and what are the consequences of these US tariffs, for example, in China. So again, also there we have a lot of uncertainty, making it difficult for companies to forecast, and making it difficult for the consumers to have more confidence. And therefore the market, the demand for textile and apparel products is quite weak for the moment. So in short, it's times of turbulence and times of uncertainty, I would say. Yeah, it's true. There is a lot of talk about nearshoring or friendshoring, reshoring. And certainly as at Euratex, we are working quite a lot on that. So we are working a lot with our neighboring countries in the south, with Morocco, Tunisia, with our Turkish colleagues, but even also in the east, with Ukraine, etc., to try and strengthen the relationship between the EU and those neighboring countries, and indeed to try to develop an integrated value chain that would strengthen this Euro-Mediterranean supply chain for the textile industry. Will this bring back the entire textile production closer to Europe, bring back from Asia? Certainly not. And we're not asking for that. We don't want this to happen, but certainly to increase slightly the production in these neighboring countries for some segments of the industry, probably the medium higher end segment of the industry. That would certainly be very, very welcome. So it's not about bringing back the entire production, but more about rebalancing the supply chain to avoid that we are fully dependent, that we are 100% dependent on China or Vietnam or Bangladesh. So it's more about spreading the risk, about diversifying the supply chain than try to bring back the entire supply chain closer to Europe. But we do need to make that effort to work with our colleagues, as I said, in the south and in the east. We have, as Euratex, we have recently signed memorandum of understanding with the colleagues in Morocco and Tunisia, We are working with our Turkish colleagues for the modernization of the customs union. We have last year with the European Union agreed on the so-called modernized rules of origin under the PEM Convention and the Euromed PEM Convention. So we are taking those specific initiatives to strengthen this supply chain. But once again, this will help to increase capacity, but it will never bring back the entire production from Asian countries. How developed? It's difficult to put a number on this, but what we see is many European textile companies making a great effort to make this green transition, as we say. Efforts in terms of new technologies, in terms of investment, new products. So we see a great move towards this, towards sustainability. We supported a few weeks ago, for the first time, there was the Textile Recycling Expo here in Brussels. It took place a few weeks ago. And it was great to see so many textile companies, European textile companies, showcasing their technology, their ambition, their plans to produce more sustainable textile products, garments, technical textiles. So there was a great, there's plenty of good intention, good movement. The challenge, of course, is that today producing more sustainable textile products is not really rewarded by the market. Sustainable textiles tend to be more expensive. There is a cost, there is an investment cost, there is a production cost that can be higher. And so the challenge that we have is how to reward those companies who want to produce more sustainable textile products, how to reward them by the markets. And that is the challenge that we need to work on today. So that it's not just the entrepreneur making the investment and the good intentions, but that the market is actually responding positively towards those investments. It's true that this kind of green transition, the Green Deal as we know it, is being shifted. There's some changes in the legislation, some kind of pausing, some slowing down, some slight modification, as you said, through this omnibus initiative. And it's a difficult discussion because without the legislation, without this regulatory push, indeed the question is whether brands, for example, will decide on their own to move forward towards more sustainable, selling more sustainable textile products. The fear is that this will not happen, meaning without this regulatory push, the brands will not be inclined, because of competitive pressure, to make this transition towards selling more sustainable textile products. So the fear is indeed that if the regulation is slowing down, the whole transition of the industry towards more sustainable textile products will slow down as well. So we need to be careful that this momentum towards more sustainable textile products is not slowing down, because the regulator is hesitating, is making some changes in the pathway. Because the pressure in the market among brands, notably the pressure from online platforms, for example, is so high that for brands it's very difficult to move forward on sustainability with typically a higher cost, while competition is so high on the market. So, in other words, we need those regulations, those sustainability regulations, but of course we need those regulations to be properly done, to be well designed. And so the whole question is it better to have no regulation or to have bad regulation? So if, for example, on due diligence, we have seen that things are probably a bit too complicated, too burdensome, overlapping between different pieces of legislation. So let's fix it. Let's revise that regulation, but let's not totally abandon that regulation, because if we do that, the push for sustainable textiles will go away. So it's a careful balance between maintaining that regulatory flow towards more sustainability, but at the same time make sure that this regulation is properly done. So it's about the quality of the legislation, it's about the timing of the legislation, but we do need that framework, that regulatory framework, to push the industry towards more sustainability. And of course, we need that framework to be implemented not just in Europe, but all around the world. Because if only that is part of the challenge that we have, if only the legislation is implemented for European companies and not for brands and textile companies outside Europe, we have a problem. So it's a complicated process, but in essence, we'd like to see this regulatory process to move forward, but it's true that we need to be very, very careful to make sure that as we move forward, it's quality regulation, properly enforced, properly implemented, not just in Europe, but around the world. I think it's too strong to talk about a lost opportunity. The opportunity is still there. And indeed, we very much believe that European textile companies can be or should be a global leader when it comes to sustainable textiles. And we have the technology, we have the know-how, we have the ambition among entrepreneurs. So it should become, or it should be, sustainability should be a source of competitiveness for our companies. But once again, and for that, we need the right regulatory framework. But putting together that framework is complex. It's not just about putting together the legislation. It's about how to implement that legislation, how to control the legislation. Control not just here in Europe, but control also the products that are made outside Europe and that would enter the European markets, because they need to comply with that legislation as well. So we're talking about market surveillance, about enforcement. So creating that regulatory framework, we should maintain that ambition to work on that, because it will serve the competitiveness of our companies. But we have to acknowledge that it's a complicated process, taking probably a little bit more time than we thought. So let's keep that momentum. Let's keep that ambition to create a good framework whereby European textile companies will be rewarded for investing in sustainability. But we are in this, as I said in the beginning, we're in this kind of, it's not a wait and see attitude, but it's kind of realizing how complicated it is to create such a framework. And if you look in other sectors, in the plastic industry, for example, etc., it took many years. So maybe we were too over ambitious or too naive, maybe, in thinking that we can do this in 2-3 years. So it takes more time. So our ambition is not to give up on this sustainability ambition, on this green transition. We should keep it, but we need to make sure to do it properly, and that takes a little bit more time than we thought. As I said before, we want this regulation to be put in place, but it has to be done properly, with a clear timetable, with predictability, and ensuring that whatever rules we are establishing here in Brussels, they will be properly implemented and controlled for all products coming into the market. So it's regulation, yes, but with a number of conditions which are critically important. Then secondly, referring to this kind of global markets, we have this slogan in Euratex, which is to say we promote free but fair trade. So that means when it comes to global competition, we want to keep our markets open. We are dependent on supplies from the rest of the world, but we need to insist, maybe more than in the past, that everybody follows the same rules. And then I refer, for example, to the emergence of online platforms who are coming in the European Union quite aggressively with this kind of low-value packages, without any duties, without any control on the compliance of those products, sometimes with undervalued VAT declarations. So that is a kind of an unfair competition. So we need to maintain a level playing field for our European companies. That also applies, for example, when we are negotiating a free trade agreement with India, which is very high on the political agenda. When we will have this FTA with India, we need to make sure that our European companies will have a fair access to this huge Indian market, because today there are many non-tariff barriers that are complicating export of European textile products into the Indian market. So again, this whole free but fair trade mantra or slogan is critically important. And then maybe a third block relates to, let's say, the cost of manufacturing in Europe is a problem. And then I refer specifically to the cost of energy. So for many European textile companies, that is today the biggest burden to maintain their production in Europe. Energy costs, labor costs. So what can we do to reduce that cost of production so that we can maintain a competitive manufacturing industry here in the European Union? That is also high on our wish list. So it's about cost issues, it's about fairness issues, and it's about good quality legislation, good quality regulation. I would say these are some of the main broad topics that we are discussing here in Brussels. With all this increased focus on the fashion sector here in Brussels, we have this textile strategy, we have a lot of regulations coming up, etc. We need to make sure that our voice is heard. And that's why we probably need to be, as some people say, need to be a little bit louder in expressing our proposals, our concerns towards this regulation, etc. I would say this also requires us to be more united, because when you say the fashion industry is very fragmented in terms of segments of the fashion segment industry, high-end, low-value, everything in between. You have the whole supply chain, the whole kind of manufacturing supply chain. So traditionally, textile and fashion companies were operating in their own specific segment. And so what we need to do to be more effective from a lobbying perspective is to try and speak with one voice between the manufacturers and the brands, even in the brands in the fashion segment, high-end luxury, medium range, etc. So we need to join forces rather than go out to Brussels, each with their own kind of specific demands, try to see what are the common interests that we have across or within the fashion industry, or between the textile and fashion industry, and speak with one voice. I think that would be, that is important. That is, by the way, why as Euratex, we are reaching out to several, I would say, segments of the fashion industry. That's why we try to be a bridge between the textile manufacturers and the brands, who need to be more together. That's why we work, for example, also with the chemical industry. That's why we work also more with the automotive industry, with the textile machine makers. So we really try to develop what we call textile ecosystem and identify what are the common interests that we have within that kind of broad sector, and try to speak with one voice towards the European institutions, because it's indeed important to speak with one voice, to speak up, and make sure that our common concerns are properly heard by the Commission, by the European Parliament. It's interesting to see that, again, because of all the regulatory change, because of the pressure from online platforms, etc., today we see this rapprochement, we say in French, this coming much closely together between the manufacturers and the brands, much closer today than say 5 years ago. We, of course, remind the brands that without a manufacturing base in Europe or in the greater European area, they would be in difficulty as European brands, because their dependency on sourcing from faraway countries in Asia, for example, makes them more vulnerable. So if they want to promote themselves as offering high quality, sustainable textile and fashion products, they need to have a solid base. They need to have a solid manufacturing base. And therefore there is an interdependency. Manufacturers need brands, of course, to reach out to the consumer, but the brands need a solid manufacturing base. And that's, I think, that understanding has increased a lot over the last, I would say, over the last few years. And of course, that therefore requires also that the brands, when moving forward on sustainability, on transparency, data gathering, etc., that there is a kind of a shared responsibility when it comes to bearing the costs, the investment costs to produce more sustainable products, to develop more transparent supply chains through the digital product passport, for example. So there needs to be some kind of fair, balanced carrying of the burden to make this green and digital transition in the industry. It cannot be that all the burden of change is with the manufacturers. Therefore, there has to be some kind of new entente, some kind of new alliance, understanding between the brands and the manufacturers to work together and share that burden, that cost of transition and green digital transition, and jointly offer higher quality products towards the consumer. What do we ask for? Well, it's interesting to see that, again, because of all the regulatory change, because of the pressure from online platforms, etc., today we see this rapprochement, we say in French, this coming much closely together between the manufacturers and the brands, much closer today than say 5 years ago. We, of course, remind the brands that without a manufacturing base in Europe or in the greater European area, they would be in difficulty as European brands, because their dependency on sourcing from faraway countries in Asia, for example, makes them more vulnerable. So if they want to promote themselves as offering high quality, sustainable textile and fashion products, they need to have a solid base. They need to have a solid manufacturing base. And therefore there is an interdependency. Manufacturers need brands, of course, to reach out to the consumer, but the brands need a solid manufacturing base. And that, I think that that understanding has increased a lot over the last, I would say, over the last few years. And of course, that therefore requires also that the brands, when moving forward on sustainability, on transparency, data gathering, etc., that there is a kind of a shared responsibility when it comes to bearing the costs, the investment costs to produce more sustainable products, to develop more transparent supply chains through the digital product passport, for example. So there needs to be some kind of fair, balanced carrying of the burden to make this green and digital transition in the industry. It cannot be that all the burden of change is with the manufacturers. Therefore, there has to be some kind of a new entente, some kind of a new alliance, understanding between the brands and the manufacturers to work together and share that burden, that cost of transition, and green digital transition, and jointly offer higher quality products towards the consumer. We focus on, or we insist on both. If we want this green transition to be successful, we need to stimulate demand for sustainable textiles, because today that demand in terms of volume is not there. And we need to invest in innovation, new technologies, new fibers, more sustainable production technologies, recycling technologies, etc. So we really need both dimensions. How can we convince the consumer to buy more sustainable textile products? And that then relates, of course, to the role of the brands. And how can we invest in innovation, working, as I said before, with textile machine makers, with research centers to come up with new technologies, etc. So we need both of them. And moving forward, here in Brussels, we are working on the so-called Circular Economy Act, which is another new piece of regulation that will come very soon. And that is the whole purpose of this Circular Economy Act, to find ways to stimulate demand for sustainable textiles through procurement, through transparency, through different fiscal measures, but also invest or offer financial support to invest in new technologies. So it's really two sides of the same coin that we need to work on to ultimately create a bigger market for sustainable textiles. It's not about, but the first point is how do you define fast fashion or ultra fast fashion? And this is not so easy. We have seen this indeed in France when they were preparing this legislation, supposedly targeting some online platforms. But then because of lack of definition, they were also targeting some French, some brands. So there is already a confusion. We need to be careful in using the definition ultra fast fashion, slow fashion. Overall, it's obviously the overall target or purpose must obviously be to reduce the environmental impacts of the textile industry. And therefore to try to limit the overconsumption and try to consider fashion products as a low value, easy thing to buy and disregard. So we need to make efforts to also towards the consumer to consider fashion as something more precious, something that should last longer. From an emotional perspective, from a quality perspective. And then do we want to put different brands in boxes, fast fashion, ultra fast fashion? I think I would not engage in this kind of discussion. But for me, the focus must be how can we promote an industry that is offering high quality items produced in a way that is as sustainable as possible, with full transparency towards the consumer. That is with a lot of kind of creativity. So that is what the European textile and fashion industry stands for. And then if this is qualified as fast fashion or slow fashion, for me, that is not the main point. The main point is being clearer towards the consumer and also towards the regulator that what we want is to promote high quality, creative, beautiful, long-lasting fashion products made preferably by European brands, by European manufacturers. That is our ambition. And so we probably need to be a bit careful in putting brands in different boxes. I think it's difficult, it's dangerous to make those different boxes. What is also what we need to be careful about this French initiative and what happens in Spain and some other countries is, of course, the individual member states taking their own initiative at national level, because this will lead to a fragmentation of the single market. So if France is issuing its own legislation, and then Spain is coming, or maybe Germany or Belgium, with its own EPR system linked to that, with its own waste criteria, for example. So then we are creating a fragmented single market, which for the industry is not a good thing. So while we kind of philosophically can welcome the initiative in France to tackle the overconsumption, to tackle the kind of pushing aggressively low value products, and we can welcome that as an idea. At the same time, we need to be very careful that we are not creating 27 different systems, 27 different markets, which also for European brands would be very detrimental. So let's move forward together at European level to promote, again, high quality, creative, sustainable textile and fashion products, preferably, ideally made or promoted by European brands and manufacturers.